Marcus adjusted the strap of his small backpack as he and his younger sister, Aaliyah, walked into the airport. The bright lights and the sound of rolling suitcases made the place feel alive, and both of them could hardly stop smiling. It was their first time traveling alone, and the excitement made their steps quicker. Their father had surprised them the night before with first-class tickets. He had handed them the envelopes like they were golden keys and said, "You've both worked so hard this year. This is your reward." Marcus was 15, a little taller now and proud of the way his voice had started to sound deeper. He tried to act confident, but inside he felt butterflies. Aaliyah, just 12, skipped beside him with her hair tied up neatly, clutching the new travel pillow their father had bought her. For her, the journey wasn't just about the flight, it was about the adventure. She loved the idea of sitting in a big, comfortable seat and being treated like an important passenger. As they reached the check-in desk, Marcus pulled out the tickets with care. He had practiced this moment in his head, wanting to make his father proud by handling things responsibly. The attendant behind the counter gave them a quick smile and took the tickets. Everything went smoothly, and within minutes they had their boarding passes in hand. Aaliyah whispered, "We're really flying first class." Her excitement made Marcus grin, though he tried to stay cool. They made their way through security, where Marcus tried to look serious and grown up, while Aaliyah giggled nervously as she took off her shoes. They placed their small bags on the belt, passed through the scanner, and felt a wave of relief when everything went smoothly. Once they collected their things, Aaliyah tugged on Marcus's arm and said, "Let's find our gate." The airport was busy that day. Families were rushing with strollers, business travelers were speaking quickly on phones, and groups of friends laughed loudly near the food court. The siblings walked side by side, pulling their small suitcases behind them. Aaliyah's eyes darted around, amazed at the shops filled with books, perfumes, and electronics. She asked Marcus if they could stop, but he reminded her that Dad said not to waste time. "We'll look later, maybe after we land," he said, trying to sound older and responsible. When they reached their gate, the large window beside it revealed airplanes lined up on the runway. Aaliyah pressed her face against the glass for a moment, pointing out the big aircrafts as they moved slowly across the tarmac. Marcus sat down and pulled out his phone, sending a quick message to their father, "We're at the gate. Everything's fine." Their father replied almost immediately, "Good job. I'm proud of you. Call me before you board." They sat together, sharing snacks from their bag. Aaliyah munched on crackers while Marcus tried to explain how amazing first class was going to be. He had read about it online, describing the wide seats, fancy meals, and even little screens for entertainment. Aaliyah's eyes widened with every detail. She pictured herself sipping juice from a glass cup while leaning back comfortably. The announcement came over the speakers, calling first-class passengers to line up for boarding. Aaliyah jumped to her feet and grabbed her bag. Marcus stood, straightening his shoulders, and they walked toward the gate with the confidence their father had encouraged. The line for first class was much shorter than the other one, and Marcus felt proud as they stepped into it. He noticed a few adults glancing at them, perhaps curious that two kids were in the first class line, but he ignored it. They had tickets. They belonged there. As they reached the gate attendant, Marcus handed over the boarding passes with a polite smile. The woman scanned them and looked at the screen, then at the children. Her expression changed slightly, though Marcus couldn't quite understand why. She looked from Marcus to Aaliyah, and then back at the tickets. Aaliyah, who was still smiling, whispered, "This is it. We're going in." But Marcus noticed the pause and felt a flicker of unease. He waited, his heart thumping a little faster. The attendant leaned closer to them and asked slowly, "Are these really your tickets?" Marcus blinked, confused. "Yes, ma'am. Our dad bought them for us." He tried to sound respectful, the way his father had taught him. Aaliyah held her pillow tighter, looking up at the woman with wide eyes. The attendant frowned slightly and studied the screen again. Marcus could hear the sound of other passengers shuffling behind them, waiting for their turn. The moment that had started so joyfully was suddenly feeling strange. Aaliyah looked up at her brother, sensing something was off. She whispered, "What's wrong?" Marcus didn't want to worry her, so he shook his head and said softly, "Nothing. It's fine." But deep down, a question formed in his mind. Why was she hesitating? The woman handed back the tickets without scanning them, her lips pressed tightly together. "Wait here a moment," she said, stepping aside to whisper something to another staff member. Marcus and Aaliyah stood there, unsure of what was happening. The voices of the staff were too quiet to hear, but their glances toward the children made it clear they were discussing them. Aaliyah shifted uncomfortably and asked, "Why aren't we boarding? Everyone else is going in." Marcus didn't know what to say. He looked around at the other passengers who were now boarding smoothly, their tickets scanned without issue. The pride he had felt only minutes ago was slowly being replaced by confusion. He pulled out his phone and thought about calling his dad, but he hesitated. Maybe it was just a simple mistake, maybe they would clear it up soon. He didn't want to disappoint his father by looking like he couldn't handle the situation. So, he told Aaliyah gently, "Let's just wait. I'm sure they'll let us in soon." But as he stood there, watching more and more passengers walk past them, Marcus felt a strange knot forming in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He glanced at Aaliyah, who was trying hard to stay cheerful, but he could see the worry in her eyes. The excitement of the day was slowly being replaced by questions, and Marcus knew that this trip was turning into something very different from what he had expected. Marcus stood with his sister at the gate, the tickets still clutched in his hand. The woman at the counter kept glancing at them as if she was not sure what to do. More and more people were walking past into the jet bridge, their tickets scanned without any problems, and the two children stood frozen, confused about why they were the only ones being stopped. Aaliyah tugged at her brother's arm nervously. "Marcus, why aren't we going in? Everyone else is boarding." Her voice was soft, almost worried now. "I don't know," Marcus whispered back. He tried to keep his tone calm, but inside he felt uneasy. Their father had given them clear instructions, and he had trusted Marcus to handle everything. Now it seemed like something was slipping out of his control. The woman returned after speaking with her colleague. She leaned over the counter and said, "These seats are in the first-class section." Her voice sounded firm, almost doubtful. Marcus blinked, wondering why she said it like that. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus answered politely, "that's what our dad bought for us." He held up the tickets again as if to prove his words. The woman sighed quietly, then glanced at the other attendant nearby. "Children, are you sure you're supposed to be here?" she asked again, as though the tickets in Marcus's hand weren't enough proof. Aaliyah frowned. "Of course we're supposed to be here. These are our seats." Her young voice sounded both innocent and annoyed. She had been looking forward to this moment for weeks, and now someone was acting like she didn't belong. The staff member's face softened a little, but she still didn't scan the tickets. She simply said, "Please wait to the side for a moment." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. They weren't doing anything wrong, so why were they being told to step aside? Passengers in the line gave quick glances toward them. Some looked curious, others just ignored the scene and continued on their way. But for Marcus and Aaliyah, it felt like the spotlight was on them, and not in a good way. They moved aside, standing a few feet from the counter. Aaliyah hugged her pillow tightly, biting her lip. "Marcus, what if they don't let us on the plane?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "They will," Marcus said quickly, though even he wasn't sure anymore. "We have tickets. We belong there." He spoke firmly, partly to reassure her and partly to remind himself. Minutes ticked by. Boarding continued. Families walked past with their children, business travelers pulled their carry-ons briskly, and couples held hands as they stepped onto the plane. The line grew shorter and shorter, yet Marcus and Aaliyah were still waiting by the side, their tickets untouched. Finally, another staff member, a man with a neat uniform and badge, walked over. He looked at the two children, then at the tickets. He gave a small frown before speaking. "Kids, these tickets are for first class. Did your parents really buy these for you?" Marcus felt a sharp sting in his chest. He nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. Our dad bought them for us. He gave them to us last night. We checked in already, and the lady at the counter gave us these boarding passes." He spoke clearly, trying his best to sound mature and respectful. But the man didn't look convinced. He glanced at his colleague again. "It's unusual," he murmured softly, though Marcus could hear it. "Two unaccompanied minors in first class. Are you sure this is correct?" Aaliyah's face turned red. She didn't understand why they were being questioned like this. "We're telling the truth," she blurted out. Her young voice cracked as she spoke, and Marcus quickly put a hand on her shoulder. "Calm down," he whispered, trying to steady her. Inside, though, he felt the same mix of anger and embarrassment. Why didn't anyone believe them? Why did it matter that they were kids? Their father had worked hard, bought the tickets, and made sure they could travel comfortably. Yet here they were, being treated like they didn't belong. More passengers looked over, noticing that the siblings were being kept aside. A few raised their eyebrows, others shook their heads as if they didn't understand what was happening. To Marcus, every stare felt like a weight pressing down on him. The boarding line grew smaller until only a few passengers remained. The man at the gate finally spoke again, his voice slow. "We'll need to double-check these tickets. Please wait here until we confirm with the system." Marcus wanted to argue, but he held himself back. He remembered his father's advice, stay respectful, even when you're frustrated. Still, his hands tightened around the tickets. His chest felt heavy, as if someone was squeezing his pride out of him. Aaliyah's eyes began to water, though she tried to blink back the tears. "Why are they treating us like this?" she whispered. Her voice cracked with hurt. Marcus didn't have an answer. He only shook his head and said softly, "It's okay. Don't cry. Dad will fix this if we need him to." They stood there quietly as the gate agents continued speaking in hushed voices. The last few passengers walked past them and disappeared into the plane. Soon, the waiting area became quiet, with only a few stragglers nearby. Marcus and Aaliyah were the only ones left who hadn't boarded. The woman returned, her expression still uncertain. "Children, the system shows these tickets are real. But we need to confirm with your guardian before we can let you board. Do you have someone we can call?" Marcus pulled out his phone, his hand trembling slightly. He wanted to prove once and for all that they weren't lying. But he also hesitated. He had promised his father he would handle everything responsibly. Calling now felt like admitting he had failed. Before he could decide, Aaliyah whispered urgently, "Marcus, just call Dad. Please." Her voice was desperate now, a mix of fear and frustration. He looked at his sister, then at the staff who still seemed unwilling to let them on. Finally, he unlocked his phone and scrolled to his father's number. He pressed the call button, his heart pounding as the phone rang. On the other end, their father picked up almost instantly. "Marcus? Did you board already?" His voice was calm, confident, expecting everything to be fine. Marcus swallowed hard. "Dad, they're not letting us board. They said we can't go in first class." His voice shook as he tried to explain. There was a pause on the other side of the line. A pause so sharp it made Marcus's stomach tighten. Then his father's voice changed. It was still calm, but stronger, firmer, like steel under velvet. "Put me on the phone with the gate manager," he said. Marcus looked up at the staff. "My dad wants to talk to you." He held out the phone. The man hesitated, then took it slowly. As soon as he lifted it to his ear, his expression shifted. He listened quietly, nodding slightly, and his face grew serious. Marcus and Aaliyah watched closely. They couldn't hear their father's words, but they knew that tone. It was the same tone he used in important meetings, the one that meant people listened. The staff member glanced at his colleague nervously, still listening to the firm voice on the other end. After a long moment, he handed the phone back to Marcus. "Your father wants to speak to you again," he said carefully. Marcus pressed the phone to his ear. His father's voice came steady. "Don't worry. Stay calm. I'll handle this." Then he hung up before Marcus could even reply. Marcus lowered the phone slowly, a strange mix of relief and anticipation filling him. He looked at his sister. "Dad's handling it." Aaliyah nodded, wiping her eyes. "Good. Because I don't like this at all." The siblings stood together, side by side, not knowing that the next few minutes would change everything in the airport. Marcus held his phone tightly after the call ended. His father's words still echoed in his mind, "Don't worry. Stay calm. I'll handle this." For the first time since the boarding problem began, he felt a wave of relief. His father had a way of solving things, of making people listen. If anyone could fix this, it was him. Aaliyah leaned closer to her brother. "What did Dad say?" she asked anxiously, her eyes wide with hope. "He said not to worry." "He's handling it," Marcus replied, trying to sound steady even though his heart was still racing. He wanted to believe those words fully. Deep inside, he knew that once their father stepped in, the situation was going to change. The gate attendants seemed unsettled now. They kept glancing at the children and whispering among themselves. The man who had spoken on the phone earlier looked stiff, his jaw tight. He glanced at his watch nervously, as though waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed slowly. The hum of the airport filled the silence between Marcus and Aaliyah. Suitcases rolled across the tile floors, announcements echoed over the speakers, and people walked briskly by, heading toward their own gates. But for the siblings, time felt heavy, each second stretching out as they waited for their father's influence to reach the airport. Aaliyah sat down on a nearby chair, hugging her pillow to her chest. "I hate waiting," she murmured. "Why do they have to make it so hard for us? We're not doing anything wrong." Marcus sat beside her. He didn't have an answer. He only said softly, "Sometimes people don't understand. But Dad will make them understand." Just then, the man at the gate received a call on his work phone. He stepped aside quickly, lowering his voice, but Marcus caught parts of the conversation. The man's face grew pale, his eyes darting toward the children and then to his colleague. "Yes, sir. I understand. Right away." His tone was clipped and formal, like someone speaking to a superior. When he hung up, he didn't return to his calm, confident posture. Instead, he walked quickly to the counter, speaking urgently to the woman there. She looked startled, then began typing rapidly on the computer. The tension in their movements made Marcus realize something important was happening. Aaliyah noticed too. "Marcus, do you think that was Dad?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Yeah. That was him. I'm sure." Suddenly, another announcement rang out through the airport. A calm but serious voice filled the speakers, "Attention all passengers. Please note that there will be a temporary delay in flight departures. We appreciate your patience and cooperation." The words were simple, but they carried weight. People in the waiting area frowned, looking up from their phones. Some groaned, others whispered in confusion. Flight delays were common, but the way the message had been delivered sounded different, more urgent, More unusual. Marcus and Aaliyah exchanged glances. Could it really be because of their father's call? Within minutes, two managers in sharp suits appeared, walking briskly toward the gate. Their faces were serious, their steps quick. The staff who had stopped the children straightened immediately, almost as if soldiers standing at attention. One of the managers asked in a firm voice, "Where are the children?" The man at the counter gestured quickly toward Marcus and Aaliyah. The siblings stood up at once, feeling the eyes of everyone nearby settle on them. Passengers who had been waiting started whispering again, curious about why managers were arriving in such a hurry. The taller manager approached Marcus first. He bent slightly to meet the boy's eyes and said in a low voice, "Are you Marcus and Aaliyah?" "Yes, sir," Marcus answered nervously. He held up their tickets again, though it felt unnecessary at this point. The manager nodded firmly. "Your father has spoken to us. Everything is being taken care of." He turned to the gate attendants, his expression hardening. These children should have been on that plane already. Why were they stopped? The attendants shifted uncomfortably, stumbling over their words. We were just making sure, we thought that's enough," the manager interrupted sharply. His voice carried authority, and even other passengers could hear it. "You had no right to delay them. Their tickets are valid. They are to be treated with the same respect as every other first-class passenger." "Understood." Both staff members nodded quickly, their faces red with embarrassment. Aaliyah tugged Marcus's sleeve, whispering, "See? Dad fixed it. I told you." Her eyes shone with a mix of relief and pride. Marcus smiled faintly, but his heart still pounded. He had never seen people react like this just because of one phone call. He realized in that moment just how much influence his father carried, and how seriously people listened to him. The manager turned back to the children. "Your father will be joining us shortly. Until then, please wait here. You have nothing to worry about anymore." "Joining us?" Marcus echoed. He hadn't expected that. Their father wasn't even supposed to be at the airport, but now it seemed he was on his way. The idea brought both comfort and curiosity. If their father was coming himself, it meant he was truly determined to make sure they were safe and respected. Meanwhile, the announcement system repeated the delay message. Passengers began to grow restless. Some complained, others tried to ask staff what was happening, but the staff avoided giving clear answers. All they said was that flights were temporarily paused. Marcus sat down again, this time feeling calmer. Aaliyah leaned against his shoulder, whispering, "Dad is like a superhero." One call and the whole airport stopped. Marcus chuckled softly, though he understood the seriousness behind it. Their father wasn't just any parent, he was someone people listened to, someone whose voice carried weight far beyond their family. After about 10 minutes, the atmosphere shifted again. From across the terminal, Marcus saw a tall figure walking quickly toward them. Even from a distance, he recognized his father's stride, confident, steady, and purposeful. Aaliyah sat up straighter, her face lighting up. "It's Dad," she exclaimed in a hushed voice. Their father reached them in moments, pulling both children into a firm embrace. "Are you two all right?" he asked, looking them over carefully. His voice was softer now, filled with concern. "We're fine," Marcus said, though his voice wavered. "But they didn't believe us. They wouldn't let us board." Aaliyah added quickly, "They kept saying maybe the tickets weren't ours." Their father's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded and said, "I know. And that's why I'm here." He turned to the managers, who stood nearby waiting respectfully. "I expect this matter to be resolved completely," he said firmly. "My children should never have been questioned in this way. Their tickets were valid. They should have been treated with dignity." "Yes, sir," the taller manager replied quickly. "We deeply apologize." This will not happen again. Passengers nearby continued to watch in silence, some whispering to one another about what they were witnessing. It wasn't every day that flights were stopped, managers arrived, and executives were summoned, all because of two children and a father's phone call. Marcus stood quietly beside his sister, feeling a strange mix of pride and confusion. He realized this was more than just about plane tickets. This was about respect, about being seen and treated fairly. His father placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing by calling me," he said softly. "I'll handle the rest." And as the airport bustled around them, it became clear that what had started as a simple trip had turned into something much larger, a moment that none of them would ever forget. The moment their father arrived, everything in the atmosphere around Marcus and Aaliyah changed. People in the waiting area could sense that something serious was happening. The airport staff stood straighter, their voices more careful, and the managers stayed close by, waiting for instructions. For the two children, it felt like the world had shifted in just a few minutes. Their father, David, kept one arm gently around Aaliyah's shoulders while the other rested firmly on Marcus's back. "You both handled this well," he said softly to them. "I know it wasn't easy. But remember, when something is wrong, it's never your fault to ask for help." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling a strange sense of pride and relief. Aaliyah leaned against their father, clutching her pillow like a shield that she no longer needed to hold so tightly. David turned his attention back to the managers. "I need a clear explanation," he said in a steady, firm voice. "Why were my children denied boarding when they had valid first-class tickets?" The staff shifted nervously. One of the attendants tried to speak, but his words stumbled out awkwardly. We thought there might have been a mistake. It's not common for unaccompanied minors to sit in first class, so we were trying to confirm." David's expression hardened. "Confirming is one thing," he said calmly but sharply, "but humiliating children is another. They were treated unfairly, and in front of strangers. That is unacceptable." The managers exchanged uneasy glances. One of them cleared his throat and said, "Sir, we take full responsibility. Please understand, this was never about doubting your children personally. It was poor judgment by our staff. We are deeply sorry." But David did not let the matter end there. He stepped forward slightly, his voice carrying across the gate area. "This is not only about my family. This is about how children or any person should be treated. Respect is not optional. It is required." Passengers nearby, who had been quietly watching, began nodding. Some murmured in agreement. The story of what had happened was spreading quickly among those waiting in the terminal. People pulled out phones, some recording discreetly, others messaging friends about what they were witnessing. Then, almost like a ripple effect, the entire boarding process halted completely. Staff received new instructions through their earpieces, and one of the managers announced, "All flights will remain on hold until this situation is reviewed and resolved." The words caused a stir among travelers. Some groaned at the delay, others whispered curiously. But many looked at Marcus and Aaliyah with newfound sympathy. They could see these weren't just two kids with tickets, they were two kids who had been wronged. Marcus stood straighter beside his father, realizing that the entire airport's attention was now on them. It felt overwhelming, but also empowering. For the first time, he didn't feel like a powerless teenager. He felt like his father's presence had created a shield around him and his sister. Aaliyah whispered, "Marcus," everyone staring. "I know," Marcus whispered back, his voice steadier than before. "But it's okay. Dad's here." Within minutes, more senior airline executives arrived. Their polished suits and hurried footsteps made it clear this was no ordinary incident. They greeted David respectfully, their tones apologetic. One of them extended his hand. "Mr. Carter, we sincerely apologize for what your children experienced. This was a failure in judgment on our part, and we assure you corrective action will be taken immediately. David accepted the handshake but did not smile. Apologies are words. I need actions. I need to know what changes you will make so that no child mine or anyone else's will ever be treated this way again. The executive nodded earnestly. We understand. We will review staff training, update our procedures, and ensure that every employee knows how to handle situations like this with dignity and respect. We will also personally see that your children are accommodated and compensated for this incident. Marcus and Aaliyah watched silently, trying to understand the weight of the moment. To them, it was surreal. Only half an hour ago, they had been two kids excited to board their first-class flight. Now they were standing in the middle of a scene that had brought an entire airport to a halt. Passengers sitting nearby clapped softly, a small gesture of support. Some approached Aaliyah with gentle smiles, telling her not to worry, that she was brave. A few others patted Marcus on the shoulder, saying, "Good job for standing up and calling your dad." The kindness of strangers made the siblings feel lighter. What had started as embarrassment was slowly turning into a lesson in courage and unity. David guided his children to sit while the executives continued discussing with him. He spoke firmly, asking for clear solutions, while Marcus and Aaliyah sat side by side, whispering to each other. "Marcus," Aaliyah said, her voice filled with awe, "Dad really did stop all the flights. The whole airport is waiting because of us." Marcus gave a small smile. "Yeah. It's crazy. But it shows how powerful he is when he knows something isn't fair. I feel like we're in a movie," she giggled softly, trying to lighten the mood. Marcus chuckled too, though he felt the seriousness of the moment. He thought about the lesson hidden in all this, that sometimes people doubt you, sometimes they question your place, but standing up and having someone by your side can change everything. After nearly 20 minutes, the executives announced that the matter was resolved. Flights will now resume boarding. We thank all passengers for their patience, came the voice over the speakers. The crowd slowly began to settle, people returning to their gates. Yet, the story of Marcus and Aaliyah was already circulating far beyond the terminal. Photos, videos, and posts about the incident were appearing online within minutes, spreading the story to thousands. David returned to his children and crouched down so he could meet their eyes directly. "You both were very brave," he told them. "This wasn't easy, but you handled it with dignity. I'm proud of you." Aaliyah smiled shyly. "I almost cried, though." "That doesn't make you weak," her father said warmly. "It makes you human. What matters is that you didn't give up." Marcus nodded slowly, holding on to his father's words. He realized that the fear and anger he had felt earlier were now replaced by something stronger: pride in himself and gratitude for his father's support. Finally, the airline staff approached with genuine apologies and ushered the family toward the plane. But this time, no one questioned them. No one doubted their tickets. Instead, every step toward the aircraft was paved with respect. As they walked down the jet bridge together, Marcus whispered to his sister, "Remember this moment. It's not just about flying first class. It's about knowing we belong, no matter what anyone thinks." Aaliyah nodded seriously, then added in her playful way, "And also about finally getting that juice in a glass cup." Marcus laughed softly, the tension finally breaking. For the first time since the ordeal began, the excitement of their journey returned. And as they prepared to step onto the plane, they carried with them a story that would not just be remembered by them, but by everyone who had witnessed it. The airport slowly returned to normal, but something had changed forever. In that moment, Marcus and Aaliyah learned that even in the face of doubt, courage, respect, and the voice of someone who stands up for you can make the world stop and start again in the right way. The three of them walked slowly into the plane. Marcus and Aaliyah carried their bags while their father kept a hand lightly on each of their shoulders. This time, no one stopped them, no one questioned them. The flight attendants at the door greeted them warmly, their smiles a little more careful than usual, as if they knew exactly who these children were and what had just happened outside. "Welcome aboard," one of them said gently. "Please let us know if you need anything at all." Marcus and Aaliyah exchanged a quick glance. Just a short while ago, they had felt so small, standing at the gate with everyone staring. Now, stepping into the plane with their father beside them, they felt seen in a different way. It was no longer about doubt, it was about respect. The first-class cabin was just as Marcus had imagined, maybe even better. Wide seats stretched out like small beds, soft pillows rested neatly on top, and screens were built into each space. The air smelled faintly of fresh fabric and lemon. Aaliyah gasped softly, her earlier tears forgotten for a moment. "It's so big," she whispered. David smiled at her reaction. "Yes, sweetheart. This is what I wanted you to experience. Comfort, peace, and the reminder that you deserve to be here as much as anyone else." They settled into their seats. Marcus carefully placed his backpack under the seat, then leaned back, finally allowing himself to relax. Aaliyah tucked her pillow behind her neck and looked around in amazement. A flight attendant came by quickly, offering them drinks before the plane even took off. She placed 2 glasses of orange juice in front of them, with straws and napkins. Aaliyah's eyes sparkled. "Look, Marcus, it's in a glass cup just like you said." She giggled, finally letting go of all the tension she had been holding in. Marcus smiled too, sipping his juice slowly. "See? We made it." But their father sat quietly for a moment, watching them. His face showed pride, but also a deep seriousness. He wasn't just thinking about orange juice or comfortable seats, he was thinking about what had happened, about the way his children had been treated before this moment. "Listen to me," he said softly, leaning closer to them. "What you went through today was not fair. It should never have happened. But you must remember something important. When people doubt you, when they try to tell you that you don't belong, you cannot let them define your worth. You belong wherever your hard work, your dignity, and your right as a person place you." Marcus listened closely, letting the words sink deep. He knew his father wasn't just talking about an airplane seat. He was talking about life. Aaliyah nodded too, her young eyes shining with trust. "So, if something like this happens again, we just remember that we do belong." David smiled gently. "Exactly. And you also remember that you have a voice. Sometimes, speaking up is enough. And sometimes, you need help. Either way, you are never powerless." The plane began to taxi, the soft rumble of the engines filling the cabin. Aaliyah leaned back in her seat, excitement returning as she peeked out of the window. Marcus pulled out his phone one last time before turning it off, scrolling through messages. Already, he saw notifications piling up. Friends had seen the news online. Some had sent him screenshots of posts that read, "Kids denied first class. Father stops airport with one call." Marcus's heart skipped. The world already knew. Their story was spreading faster than he could believe. When the plane finally lifted into the sky, the pressure of the ground seemed to fall away, along with the heaviness of the earlier moments. Aaliyah leaned against her seat, sipping juice happily. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, letting the hum of the plane calm him. And David sat between them, silent but strong, knowing that his children had learned something unforgettable. Hours later, when they landed and walked out of the airport, they were greeted by the sight of cameras and reporters waiting. The story had gone beyond whispers in the terminal, it had reached the media. Flashing lights surrounded them as questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Carter, is it true you stopped all flights at the airport today? What happened to your children at the gate? How do you feel about the airline's actions?" David kept his composure, guiding Marcus and Aaliyah past the crowd. He paused only briefly to say, "My children deserve the same respect as anyone else." That is all that matters. His words were calm, but strong enough to make headlines within hours. Over the next few days, the incident became a national conversation. News channels replayed the footage, social media filled with debates, and people everywhere talked about what it meant. Some were shocked, others were supportive, but nearly everyone agreed on one thing: the siblings had been wronged, and their father's response had forced the world to pay attention. Marcus found it strange to see his face on news articles, even though he had done nothing but stand there and hold tickets. Aaliyah was amused by the attention at first, telling her friends at school, "I was on TV." But soon she realized the weight of it too. Their father, however, made sure they stayed grounded. He reminded them daily that fame was not the point. "This is not about being on the news," he said. "This is about respect. And respect must exist whether cameras are watching or not." The airline issued an official apology, not only to the family but to the public. They promised changes in their training programs, stricter guidelines for staff, and better treatment of unaccompanied minors. They even offered free travel credits to the family, but David politely declined. "This was never about free flights," he explained. "This was about principle." For Marcus and Aaliyah, life slowly returned to normal. School resumed, routines fell back into place, but the memory of that day stayed alive in their minds. Marcus, who had felt powerless at first, now carried himself with more confidence. He understood better that respect wasn't something you begged for, it was something you were entitled to, and something you could stand up for. Aaliyah, though still young, learned too. She realized that even when the world made her feel small, her voice mattered. She often told her friends, "If something's not fair, say something. Don't stay quiet." One evening, weeks after the incident, the family sat together at the dinner table. Aaliyah asked curiously, "Dad, were you scared when you called the airport?" David chuckled softly. "Scared? No. But I was angry. Not the kind of anger that makes you shout, but the kind that makes you stand firm. Because I knew I had to protect you both. That's what parents do." Marcus looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you think what happened will really change things for other kids?" David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Maybe not all at once. Change is slow. But every time someone speaks up, every time someone refuses to stay silent, the world moves a little closer to being better. And you two were part of that." The words settled into Marcus's heart like a seed. He knew that someday, when he faced challenges of his own, he would remember this lesson. He would remember standing at that gate, feeling small, then watching his father's voice turn the tide. And Aaliyah, though she was still playful and light-hearted, also carried the memory. To her, the glass cup of juice in first class wasn't just about luxury, it was about proof. Proof that she belonged there, proof that no one could take that away from her. In the end, what had begun as a simple flight turned into a story of courage, respect, and the power of standing up for what is right. Marcus and Aaliyah would never forget the day their boarding was denied, the day their father's phone call stopped flights, and the day they learned that dignity is worth protecting at all costs. And as life moved forward, that story stayed with them, not just as a headline in the news, but as a reminder in their hearts that even two children can change the way people think when they have the courage to stand and the strength of someone who believes in them.